Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
Well, we have many myths, don't we, that have formed our attitude on all this. So we have, in Greek mythology, we have the old idea of Pandora. So Pandora is sent by the gods as sort of a gift to humankind, as I understand it, but Pandora has this box with all of the ills, and she opens the box, thus loosing all of the ills upon the world.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Father Roland Calvert from the Dominican Mother House in Adrian, Michigan. The topic of this week's Reflections is creation spirituality, response to sexism. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Roland, let's talk a little bit about creation spirituality, a phrase much in the news these days, connected often with Matthew Fox, who's been silenced by the Vatican. But and it's really a hard idea to get a hold of, very slippery notion, this creation spirituality. And one way I have of doing it is to try to see it as a response to particular problems in our world. It's my way of making it concrete. So one way you could think of creation spirituality is as a response to the environmental crisis. So they try to reconstruct a theology of creation that will give us a more positive notion of the earth, our interconnectedness with it, and help us to reverence it, to treat it better, to be more conscious of the pollution and greenhouse effect and so on, so we can try to overcome it. Now, there's a second problem that I want to focus on here in this conversation. That is creation spirituality as a response to patriarchy, to a patriarchal society, which is often linked with the notion of sexism. I think there are connections between these two topics, and there's a number of feminist authors who have tried to bring them out. But I want to focus on the idea of patriarchy and sexism. When I say patriarchy, I mean a society in which males are considered to be superior and are in danger then of exploiting women for their own ends, and which is sort of a whole structured pattern of oppression of women takes place, leading to the notion of sexism, an ideology that puts women in an inferior position. So let's begin to explore that a little bit, okay?
Okay.
You want to make any comment up to this point?
Well, I think that a good way to summarize that idea of sexism and dualism in general is that it's a mindset where you divide things and categorize and label. It's either or. And in that system, the patriarchal system that has predominated, you also have a hierarchy. There's superior and inferior. And in male, female, that kind of dualism, of course, the patriarchy always emphasizes the male characteristics as being good, the feminine characteristics as being untrustworthy. And so the opposite of that would be a mentality of not either or, but both and. You begin to see the connectedness you talked about, and the relationships become where you try to build and see what it is that joins me to other people.
So dualism becomes part of the problem. In fact, Rosemary Ruther, the feminist theologian, thinks that dualistic thinking really is at the bottom of the whole patriarchal crisis and problem that we have. And you get a lot of dualisms. You get male-female, mind-body, subject-object, man-nature, inner-outer, rational, irrational. So you can begin to divide the world up, divide reality up into these two sides. And of course, what Rosemary Ruther says that as soon as you do that, inevitably one side will be considered to be superior and the other inferior. And you set up a pattern then of domination. So there's no way out. I mean, the only way to do it, you could reverse it and say instead of having males dominate females, then you could have a matrifocal society, a matriarchy in which women would dominate men. But you can't get any sort of answer as long as you've got dualistic thinking. And of course what she points out is that these things are not random, that the lower side of the dualities go together, so you get sort of a pattern going. Women who are connected with the earth and with bodiliness and with passion are seen as the lower element. whereas men are connected with rational kind of thinking, with the soul, with the higher powers, and therefore are more dominant. And that has become the sort of the essence of patriarchy as it's lived out.
Well, St. Augustine is the bad guy from Matthew Fox. He keeps quoting him, and if the quotes are accurate, they really are pretty bad. Augustine, for example, at one point is supposed to have said that only men are created in the image of God, not women, and that it is the man who has this divine attributes. Well, then the consequences of that kind of thinking, of course, are that only men should be priests, only men should be leaders, only men should be in positions of power, and so on. And Fox then critiques that whole patriarchal system for its dualism and then the exploitation of women and so many other minorities.
The part of what happens in this patriarchal society then is that women's experience is discounted. It's either ignored, forgotten, or erased. When women do make a contribution, it tends to be erased and not recorded in history and so on. And part of what happens to women then is that their life is confined to the domestic world, and their skills are not being able to be applied to the larger public realm, which is considered to be the world of men, where the real decisions are made and the power brokers operate, and where the world is shaped in one way or another. Women are confined to the inner role and to the world of the family and of the home.
One of the musical expressions of that, recently I've been listening to Wagner's Ring Cycle, which I think is one of the greatest works of the human mind that I know of, about 16 hours of music and 4 different dramas. And without going into the story completely, in the second work, Die Walküre, the head god Wotan condemns his daughter because she's been disobedient. He's going to punish her, and at the end of Die Walküre, puts her into a magic sleep atop the mountain. This is all from Teutonic mythology. And he says to her, before he plunges her into the sleep, that her punishment will be no longer to share divinity. She's been in Valhalla, but now she will sleep on that mountain until some man comes along and makes her a wife, and then she will sit at a hearth spinning and be the object of ridicule of all people. And there is such a clear delineation there between the masculine world that Wotan rules and the domestic world, and the put-down of all that's domestic. In Valhalla, in Teutonic mythology, only the heroes who have died on the battlefield go to heaven. Women are not there, as there is no heaven for them. And that's been on my mind recently. I hope to see that in New York, the whole production in May. But it's such a clear statement of this whole patriarchal thing that...
Well, we have many myths, don't we, that have formed our attitude on all this. So we have, in Greek mythology, we have the old idea of Pandora. Yeah. So Pandora is sent by the gods as sort of a gift to humankind, as I understand it. But Pandora has this box with all of the ills, and she opens the box, thus loosing all of the ills upon the world. Yeah. Thus we have a feminine figure who is responsible for all of the difficulties, problems, and concerns that we humans encounter. There's another example from another realm of mythology. And then we have a third one yet, and that is within the biblical tradition, the myth of Adam and Eve, where again Eve is the one responsible for the ills of the world. She is the one that listens to the devil, and she gets Adam to sin, and therefore all of the ills have come again through a woman. So when you look at the dominant mythologies that have shaped the consciousness of the world, we've seen just here 3 examples where a woman is the source of problems.
Sure, absolutely. In Wagner's cycle, just to give him credit, because I think he is a towering genius, the Die Walküre, the title of that, the Valkyrie, refers to the main character, Brunhilde, a woman who is a great exemplar of love. And in the entire long cycle, the one who most perfectly embodies that, except at the end she dies like everybody else. And those who love, as well as those who are despicable examples of humanity, all die in that final conflagration. So it's a rather pessimistic tale. But I think Augustine and others picking up on Eve and images like that have really contributed to the attitude toward women, that they become the great source of temptation. It's always seen through the eyes of the man, and they are a threat to the man's development spiritually or in some other way. And then that division of prostitute and Madonna, the really crazy stereotyping of women that has happened for centuries.
And we've seen that carried out in through many of the establishment movements in history. I mean, Thomas Berry, in his book *The Dream of the Earth*, tries to detail some of that, and points out how the nation state has contributed to this whole idea, that it's given us colonialism and an aggressive use of power in pursuit of male values, which are to achieve conquest and enslave people and so on, so that even in this whole situation, again, this is a male world. I mean, it's so late that women even got to vote. You know, you think of the United States in 1920 and Great Britain in 1928. I mean, that's a long time that for the nation states to have existed as sort of male enclaves of power. And then you got the modern corporation that again is involved in the creation of this patriarchal society. We can think of the whole idea of dominating the earth and the profit motive and not caring about what you do to the earth, and that again has involved women. Women have often been exploited within the factory system originally, and then needed to be protected in many ways. Now we have questions today about the corporations and how women are treated, questions of sexual harassment and so on. Now that's a mixed thing, because I think in many ways the corporations have helped women. Bright women who graduate with degrees these days are often able to move up rapidly in the corporate ladder and often get opportunities that maybe men wouldn't get. So I mean, it's a mixed thing. But what Thomas Berry is trying to do is help us to see how major institutions in the world have buttressed this patriarchal system. So he points at the nation state and at the modern corporations, what he calls the classical empires, which had the idea of the ruler by divine right, that this was God's way of setting it up, and therefore you had the notion that, well, the world's supposed to be like this, that men dominate and women are subordinate. And the final institution he points to of the four that he considers is the church. And begins to talk about the way the church has supported a patriarchal outlook. Well, that has become rather common today, and Matthew Fox takes a lot of swipes at the church, the official institutional church in that way, and we would see it in the question of women's ordination, the denial of women the chance to be ordained priests or to move up in the hierarchical system, and the use of exploited female labor in the church very often to make the whole thing run.
You see it even in episodes which I regard as so stupid, I'm just embarrassed by them, like the recent Holy Thursday thing. The very night that we celebrate the great gift of love, it is a liturgy which is concentrated on what Christ has given to us, and God's great love for all of humanity. And we had fights in the church about whether women's feet should be washed. Only masculine feet should be presented at that moment. The issue of girl servers, which is equally ridiculous, it seems to me. Patriarchy is undeniable, and it is a sin. I mean, Matthew Fox calls it a sin to be repented of, and I agree with that language absolutely. We need to change as a church. It's bad enough when a corporation is bigoted, but when the church that represents the loving God that is the worst situation of all.
And as you said, a great embarrassment, because those kind of things make the news. I noticed the Holy Thursday services made the news in a number of cases, and even there were plans altered and women picketed and so on, and still bishops refused to include them, to make the services inclusive on Holy Thursday. Very strange outlook, isn't it?
Amazing. I am a chaplain at the Adrian Dominican Mother House in Adrian, Michigan, and the dozen people whose feet were washed were all women. I mean, because that was what our congregation was, and the world didn't end. I think it's it is such a crazy thing to be worrying about when Mother Earth is dying. And there are other issues that are so cosmic, and where our energy should be spent. And when Fox says that the church and other institutions in society are sick, that there is something wrong in the way they're dysfunctional. Yes, I think the evidence is pretty strong that that's true. That where our energy goes on whether girls should be servers is insane. I mean, there are other issues that need that energy so desperately.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And the church, what we would like to see is the church be the leader in overcoming sexism in society. I'm afraid we've got a repeat of what happened with racism very often. I often say the Brooklyn Dodgers integrated before the Catholic Church did, and much to our chagrin. And I think that today, when they write the history, they're going to say that the corporate world even moved ahead of the church in according women their rights and opportunities. And that really is a sad commentary. On the other hand, I do believe that within the Judeo-Christian tradition we have tremendous resources to further the women's movement and to overcome sexism and patriarchy. In other words, we have built into our Judeo-Christian tradition a great sense that no, men and women are made in the image of God, despite what Augustine and Aquinas might have said. And we've got all kind of good, positive things going to what Jesus has done and how he interacted with people. So just to set some sort of balance there, we could become a tremendous positive force for equality and mutuality, because built into the essence of what the Judeo-Christian tradition is all about is God's love for every human being, no one to be excluded. Christ, the Redeemer of all human beings, no one excluded. And I think we need to go back and draw on those traditions. And I suppose before we do that, in a way, we have to see sort of maybe what has gone wrong or why it has somehow not had its liberating power. And I think you see an interlocking thing here between what the corporate world has done, what the world of science has produced, what patriarchal society has been all about, dualistic thinking. It's sort of an interlocking sort of events and factors which give a great power to this patriarchy, and it becomes our dominant way of viewing the world. We ingest those symbols.
Sure.
All of us, we begin to be part of that larger system.
Well, within the church, certainly one of the images, ideas, symbols that very much influences us is the very image of God, who is God, and traditionally presented as God the Father, He, masculine imagery. Really not much different, I mentioned Wagner's ring cycle, from Wotan, the chief god. Very masculine, patriarchal image. And in our own day, the movement is developing, I think it's a really wonderful development, of extending our understanding of God, not just as masculine, but as feminine, and encompassing all of creation, as creation theology would say. I really think that's a dominant image. If the God we worship is a God of power and a patriarchal figure, that is going to have such consequences on the way we think and act. And if we can see God also as our mother, and God as beyond gender, but the universal source of love, then we can make some progress in the other areas also.
I think Rosemary Ruther, in her book Sexism and God Talk, I think has done a fine job of trying to begin to work this out. And she wants to promote sort of a new image of God as the primal matrix, or as the large womb out of which everything else develops. It is a much more maternal imagery, and she hopes that with that sort of idea of this primal matrix, that we will see the goodness of both spirit and matter. In other words, she thinks when you look at this dualism, you see a dualism between matter and spirit. It's spirit that will be higher. Matter will be looked down upon. Matter will be associated with bodliness, and bodliness will be associated with women. And it will become part of this whole negative outlook. So she says part of the way we're going to have to move forward here is to understand that matter is essentially good, and that bodliness is good, and that female bodily functions have a goodness about them. Sure. And that if we can get that going, then you won't have this dualistic thinking. So God is the matrix, or the source, the creative power behind both spirit and matter. It's as though sort of one stuff comes from God, and that stuff has both a bodily, exterior, physical side, but also an inner, mental, spiritual side that is shared in all of creation. And if you can start out seeing it that way, then we won't be so separated out. In fact, that's her way of saying how you can keep the humans connected in with nature, so that the humans don't think that they're just to dominate nature, but they come from nature, they're within the circle of nature, and they're there both as males and females from the very beginning.
Sure. and that our fate is intimately bound up with nature and the world we live in. I think one of the most beautiful images I've come across in a long time is the spiritual writer Carlo Coretto, who says that he thinks of life as being in the womb of God. And just as we were a little baby in our mother's womb, for 9 months, perfectly taken care of, a warm, wonderful place, a security that was, without question. And yet we didn't see who the host was. We didn't know who our mother was. And then in the act of birth, finally we're held in her arms and in our Father's arms, and we see who it is that loves us. And he says, similarly now, we don't see who it is that gives us life, allows our heart to beat, takes care of all the needs that we have to go on living. But eventually at the act of death, which is really the act of birth, then we see whose womb we were in and are held in the arms of God. That kind of imagery, it seems to me, extends our understanding. And I've made a real effort personally to think of God as my mother, as well as my father, and to try to, and also to understand that no matter what words we use, you never limit God. And our human language surely is not going to capture God. But I guess it's for our own sake, most of all, that we need to get in touch with masculine and feminine and fight that dualism which is so destructive.
Again, what Rosemary Ruther wants us to do is to make sure that the experiences of both men and women are filtered into the overall discussion of what the great mystery that surrounds us is all about. That's her way of saying it. In other words, she wants to get rid of even this whole idea of labeling things as masculine characteristics or feminine characteristics. She said that will just mess us up. She sees that as sort of the Jungian heresy, we are following the psychotherapist Carl Jung, who talked about there being masculine characteristics and feminine, and men are supposed to get in touch with their anima or their feminine pole, and that's how we'll move forward. And Rosemary Ruther thinks, no, that isn't right. That will just perpetuate the stereotypical thinking. And what she wants us to do is simply let people be people. Let human beings be human beings. They will sort out as males and females. Men and women will have diverse kind of experiences in this world, and we have to be able to listen to it. Don't erase women's experiences or negate it or set it aside or ignore it, but allow them to be part of the public discourse about who God is for us. And that when both men and women freely can do that, we will get a richer picture, larger picture of what the great God is always about. And as you well said, it seems to me, always remembering that God exceeds our images. God is neither male nor female. Those categories don't apply to God. He's above and beyond those kinds of distinctions that are common to us on this earth.
She is.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. Our language is so puny, even to express human concepts, to capture the mystery of human love or the mystery of how my eye works or my body or whatever. But then when you get to divine subject matter, there is no way the human language can encompass that or begin to do justice to it.
The other figure that we can resurrect in all of this, I think, is Jesus Christ, and to see him in various ways. One way is to look at the historical Jesus and the way the historical Jesus broke barriers. That's one way of thinking of him as a barrier breaker. In other words, in his society, he rose above the taboos about women. He talked to women in public, which you weren't allowed to do. He included them in the official religious discourse, which you weren't allowed to do. He touched them in public, which was a terrible taboo to break, and so and he treated them with sensitivity, and he made them his apostles, so that Mary Magdalene becomes in one portrayal of the appearance accounts the first apostle, the first one sent to give the good news to others, so that the historical Jesus really is one who would cut through the patriarchal stereotypes and would include women as part of the whole message of salvation, God's thrust to bring all of us back to himself.
You find that particularly in St. Luke's Gospel, which is being read in Catholic churches during this liturgical year, a great sensitivity to the place of women. And it's pretty obvious that Luke must have gone to many of the early women he didn't know Jesus, and heard from them eyewitness accounts of what Jesus was like. It seems to me that the woman taken in adultery, which is a gospel we had a couple of weeks ago, is a particularly sensitive account of how a patriarchal system is bringing this woman to be executed. The man is not there. One assumes that you have to have a partner to have had adultery, and no explanation given. The man just simply got away. But Jesus cuts through all that patriarchal garbage and sees the human being who is standing there suffering and terrified, and solves the problem by saying, whoever has sin, cast the first stone, and then the author, I don't think they know, it's not one of the four evangelists, whoever wrote that, but he says, beginning with the eldest, they left one by one, and then Jesus cuts through to the human being that was there and said, nobody is left to condemn you, and I don't do it either. It's a remarkably sensitive and beautiful story about a man clearly in touch in himself, his whole self, so that he could also see the humanity of the woman out there.
The whole idea of Luke's gospel, it seems to me that Luke does exactly what Rosemary Ruther thinks you should do. That is, he brings out both the experience of men and women. So he pairs Simeon and Anna.
Yes.
And then he will talk about women's distinctive experience to help us understand the kingdom, like baking the bread and searching the house and so on. So it's a distinctive woman's experience, but it is used to fill out the picture of what the kingdom and what God is all about. I think he does exactly what a contemporary feminist would want a biblical author to do.
Sure.
Let's go on, Roland, and say at least a few words about the cosmic Christ, because that's Matthew Fox's way of overcoming patriarchy, is through the notion of the cosmic Christ. And that's something that is also found in Teilhard de Chardin and other authors. It's the great hymns of the New Testament that talk about Jesus as the ruler of the whole world. Every knee bends before Jesus. God has a great plan to reunite everything in Christ. Christ sustains the universe. He's above the angels. He's the Logos, or Word, that's the source of everything that exists. And so you get a whole idea here of Christ functioning in this cosmic way. And Matthew Fox thinks that if we get in touch with that, we're going to be able to see then how Jesus Christ can break down the barriers today.
I think he says in that book that all sin has as its basis this dualism, this dichotomizing, separating people and things. And that he advocates a return to mysticism, which in the past has been identified as feminine. It's getting in touch with the part of our brain, I always forget, but it's the right brain.
The right brain,
it's
yes.
intuitive, and imaginative and playful and erotic. And that's always been downplayed in a patriarchal system. But and now he says the process of mysticism is getting back in touch with that, not letting your rationality go, but balancing it also with feelings and being aware of that other side. I heard Matthew Fox speak at Adrian, Michigan.
Roland, I hate to cut you off, but we're going to have to stop here. And I think Matthew Fox is an interesting character. And he does talk about the cosmic Christ, and that's his way of bringing in what you said, I think, about mysticism. The mystics understand that cosmic character of Christ who reunites everybody and holds everybody in union, and that gives us the responsibility, therefore, to live in care and in mutuality.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Father Roland Calvert from the Dominican Mother House in Adrian, Michigan. The topic of this week's Reflections was Creation Spirituality, Response to Sexism. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.